As you know, the Meat Eater Live Tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in Meat Eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.
The Hunting Collective is presented by Element.
I guess I grew up on an older road.
Hey everybody, welcome to episode 142. I always have to check with Phil for the episode number. I'm bad with numbers, names, words, writing.
Math, geography, spelling.
Geography, pretty much every basic human sect of knowledge. But we're joined by Phil Taylor, of course, always. Hi. Say hi, Phil.
Hello.
How you doing, buddy?
Doing good. How are you?
I'm fine.
Fine. That doesn't sound
busy. It's just
doesn't
busy.
sound positive.
It's the time. You'll know this when you start hunting. It's a time right before elk season. It's just like the run up to hunting season, and you got to do everything normal in your life, but you also have to prepare yourself mentally, physically. You got to get your archery game right. You got to get your calls out. You got to rip your calls. There's a lot of stuff to do, man. And
sounds exhausting.
It fills the open space in your life. You can't. No more TV. No more movies. No more Netflix.
Whew.
For you, no more video games.
Count me out.
Yeah, no more Star Wars. Nothing, dude. It's just whatever open time you have is spent thinking about this shit. So
Yep.
Here we are. We're also joined by Remi Warren. Say what's up, Remi.
What's up, Remi?
What are you doing over there, man?
I just got done shooting my rifles this morning because I'm headed out to Alaska to go caribou hunting, and I'm excited about that. But I wanted to give it one last little range check, before I lock them in the case and head out. And looking forward to it.
Chasing barren ground. What are you doing up there?
Yep. Caribou off a secret spot way north. We'll see. It's so secret I don't even know where I'm going. So we'll see.
Do you agree with me that like this time before season, this run up to season, and then when the opening day is coming, this is people will be hearing this when elk season is kicking off hard. But in the run up to elk season, or really, I'm sure for you for guiding or anything else, and preparing for trips, preparing for hunting. You just fill all the open space in your life with that stuff, and there's room for nothing else. Nothing else can happen.
Oh, absolutely. I was even just telling my wife last night. I was like thinking, I'm like getting everything ready for this trip, and then I'm like, okay, and then it's elk and this and that, and I just thought like, there's never a time where I actually feel fully prepared because there's always something to do, And then I'm just, for me at least, I'm trying to do everything that I need to do for the next however long now, because as soon as the season kicks off, it's just go, 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 go.
Yeah, I mean, what's your schedule looking like this year? Because I know we talked about a couple of hunts got canceled, and well, at least we can travel within the states, right?
Yeah, exactly. So long as this COVID test comes back negative. My schedule. Yeah, it's like I actually haven't been. I normally would have been on like all my hunts that I had planned kind of got canceled for that August part, but I did a few. I just picked up like an over-the-counter tag and went to California for a couple days to bow hunt deer, just check out a new spot, really kind of scout hunt it was just like a real brief excursion, and then headed over to Idaho, Montana for some antelope hunting. But my arrow hasn't found what I've been looking for yet. I don't know. I got a little picky, and then that kind of bit me later on. But now I'm headed to Alaska, and then after that, it's just all I'll be doing some elk hunting, guiding, pretty much till December. So,
yeah, I mean, because normally, what's the most days you spent in the field in a year?
The most in 1 year, it was like 323 days. That was back when I was a single fella, but it's still a lot of days. I mean, it's most of the year, aside from this year, obviously. But
yeah,
between the guiding and all the other stuff, like my own hunts and just being out, it's the majority of the year.
For folks that don't know, you recently got married. in New Zealand before COVID. Well before COVID, and
Yeah.
I that's a question I had for you always when you were telling me about this. I'm like, well, how are you going to live this life that you live while being married? Most people, most men would want to know that anyway. But like, how's it turned out over the first year and some change?
Yeah, it was actually kind of funny because everybody was like, "Oh, it's going to change when you're married." And then, like, the first year I was married, and even last year, I think I've hunted more in the last couple years since I've been married than the few years before I was married. So, I don't know. I think that wasn't true for me. But obviously, like, my wife understands this is what I do, and she goes with me a lot now. Helps run like our hunting camps and stuff. So it's actually, we get to spend more time together because we work together doing that kind of stuff. And, we're together and we're working and we're out there. So I get to spend just as many days as I did before. It's awesome.
Tell me if this is too overtold at this point or too cliche, and we'll move on. But you saved her life one time. I feel like
I did. Yes.
I feel like we should tell that briefly. I know you've probably told it a million times, but give people a quick rundown of that story.
Yeah, I mean, she essentially got lost. And this is like we weren't actually dating at the time, but she'd got lost, and her sister called me and was like, "Danielle's lost. Like, this isn't good." And she'd gone out for a hike and just never came back. And it was during like summer high desert. She was training for like marathons and other things, and I don't know, just wasn't feeling good and decided to go out and never came home. And they had like a Black Hawk helicopters out there search and rescue and couldn't find her. And it was getting to that point where she probably wasn't going to make it another day. And I loaded up my stuff and headed out into the mountains. And I ended up kind of like in the middle of the night cutting a set of tracks and finding her. And saved her life. So that was pretty cool.
Yeah, it was. What like when you cut her tracks, how far was she from when you figured this probably is her?
I don't know, a long ways. Well, so I was actually, I mean, it was like dark. I mean, it was just one of those weird experiences where I was literally just like praying for a sign of anything. And I just look down and see like some scuff marks, and I'm like, this is weird. Like right where I was standing. I'm like, no way. But there's deer tracks everywhere. And so I kind of followed them, but lost them. Like it's just like hard dirt, big mountains, and then I just got like this weird feeling in it was like this kind of like this bench, midway up in the mountain from what I could tell. I mean, it was like midnight. And then I actually went, I saw like, cause I was trying to get a FLIR system. And so like a night vision kind of deal.
Yeah.
And I saw this like light off in the distance, and I thought, oh, maybe that's the guy, one of the sheriff guys, because he was going to get it and contact me, but I didn't have any service or anything, and I forgot my satellite messenger. So I started walking that way, and it turned out to just be like some random people like camping or like backpacking, and then I was like, my brother and friend Joe were out there, and I radioed them, and they were like looking kind of because they had dogs earlier, and they were kind of like looking around where the dogs were. And I just kind of was like, I'm just going just wherever I feel like I want to go. And I radioed them and was like, maybe we should kind of regroup and figure out like be glassing first thing in the morning, or I don't know. And I was like, but I'm going to go back and check this spot out that I just had like, I don't know, this weird feeling. So, and that's kind of where I saw those tracks. So then I went back to that spot about, I don't know, it was a little ways away from where I was. And then I just literally was like sitting there, yelled out, "Danielle, this is Remi. If you can hear me, I'm not leaving till I find you." Like a few seconds later here, "Remi," and then nothing. And I was like, oh shit, did I just make that up, or no, that was real? And then I ended up, like, I only heard her, I like radioed my brother and said, hey, I heard her like get a medical team up here now. Like, I don't know if that's, and I'm turning my radio off, because if that's the last if I only hear one more time, I don't want the radio going off and then miss it because it was so faint. And then it was like this big basin, so I couldn't really actually tell where the sound was coming from. I thought it was like across because there's like some cliffs across that I remember before it got dark. And just like from a long ways away because I was just like looking up into this valley from the bottom. Mm-hmm. And so then I was thinking maybe she was like in those cliffs or whatever. And then I started like running toward that direction and then heard her one more time and found her. She was like 300 yards below me.
Wow.
At that second point. Yeah.
What had she done when she just got lost and was trying to get down or got cliffed out, or what had happened?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like foggy because she essentially probably got like some form of heat stroke, for sure, like major, massive dehydration. I think she like woke up and had no clue where she was.
Wow. Oh, man, and this
like didn't know like which way to go. So it was kind of like, it was actually good that she stayed put, and she was like stayed put. She kind of like was in like this, tried to find some shade. She did hear the helicopter go over a couple times, but it never saw her. And then they had to actually cancel the helicopter had to go back, and it was done because it had used up all its time and had to go back. So, yeah, and they actually weren't even sure that she was there. It was a really weird scenario because they actually had like reports of like a vehicle with Mexico plates leaving, and they were kind of like following this assumption that maybe she'd gone back. Like, because the dogs like went up, followed the rocks, and then came back to the truck. So there's like this assumption that she walked up, walked back, and then was taken. So it was just like a really messed up scenario. It was like a lot of fear going on, like a lot of like thoughts of worst case scenarios.
Yeah, I shouldn't laugh at that, but yeah, I mean, do you guys talk about it now? Because you guys weren't dating then. It was some time right before you started dating after that.
Yeah, like we had dated prior to that, and then and then that kind of got us back together. I mean, it was like when you save someone's life, you're kind of like, yeah, now you should go out with me.
Can I take you out to dinner now? Was she pretty delirious when you found her? Like, did she know what was going on, or do you think she was close to death?
No, she had no clue. I mean, like I ran up and was like, oh, like I looked at her and I was just like, yeah, she just seemed so confused. Like, I think she thought she was hallucinating because I'm sure she had been like hallucinating while she was out there anyways. It was like major dehydration, cold. Cause she just went like for a run, like had no supplies, nothing. It was just like not a smart move, but, she wasn't feeling good anyways. So she was like, oh, this might make me feel better. Like a nice run through the desert and through the wilderness. And it was like she had no water, no like warm clothes. And that in the high desert, it'll be like 100 degrees in the middle of the day and then like freezing at night. And it was that time of year where it was like that, where it was just super hot in the daytime and then 32 degrees, 35 degrees at night. So huge temperature swings. And I think that that obviously played a factor. I mean, she was like super cold at night, super hot in the middle of the day, super thirsty.
Yeah.
Yeah. But yeah, I was like, do you know who I am? I was like, what's your name? Like, she's like, I don't know. Like, wow. Do you know who I am? I think so. I don't know. Like, she was like super confused for sure.
Trippy. Yeah, well, I'm glad that you found her, and now she is the very understanding wife of a traveling hunter, and she's I've met her. She's awesome. It's one hell of a story. Although your life kind of has a lot of those types of stories in it. Some life-saving stories, some harrowing stories, some crazy things. I guess the live wild, hunt hard fits, right?
Yeah, you're like, well, when you spend 300 days a year in the field, you're gonna see some random
something's gonna happen.
Yeah, yeah, you're just like, because no 2 days are the same out there. It's like that's what I love about it. But like, you just see some crazy stuff, like in nature, just wild things happen, or you're just in like interesting scenarios where, yeah, crazy things can happen. I mean, I don't know.
Do you feel like when you think about that that time, and I'm sure other things that have happened to you, do you think about, what are the things that you have to do to keep yourself prepared out there? Because that's when I'm thinking about what she did, as you said, not the smartest thing to do. And each of us, I'm up in the mountains all the time checking trail cameras. Sometimes I'm prepared. Other times I'm just right after work running out there. And that could be the time where something goes down, you fall down a cliff, whatever. There's a lot of scenarios out there. So do you have like the basic preparedness stuff people have to do every time they throw a pack on?
I don't know. Yeah, you should definitely have like water. I think if it's like desert hot, if it's hot, the water thing's huge. I've been like fairly dehydrated. Even just a couple weeks ago, I was like hunting and it's like, all right, I hiked down into this valley and there's water. And then I had this route. I've never been there, planned this route out. Like, okay, I'm going to go up there. I could see like some wet spots. So I'm like, sweet. And, do this big 3,500 foot climb and 10 miles later and there's no water. And I'm like, oh shit. Like, how do I get out of here? I like that's especially when it's like 100 degrees out. That's key, is like having the basic essentials you need to survive. And mostly that means some form of like water first, and then, possibly having like an idea of how to build or have a shelter. Like if the environment gets pretty crazy, at least having those skills. And it doesn't necessarily mean that you have to have a lot of stuff with you, but it just means that like you have those skills or like that confidence to be able to find the things that you need, or like have the things that you need with you.
Yeah, Phil, this is a time where you need to ask some questions, man. Because Remi, here's a man who's done it, most of all of it. And Phil's is about to step out on his first hunting journey at some point in the next 5 to 10 years.
Exactly.
So yeah, what's going on, Phil? Any questions for Remi?
It's tough because you try to sell me on this whole hunting thing.
Yeah.
About how fun it is and fulfilling.
Yeah.
And then you bring on people like Remi who just have endless tales of near-death experiences.
Well, Remi's a
and then you bring
level.
on like couples like who say that it's like
Ryan
put
and Hillary
strain
Lampers.
on their marriage and all this stuff. And you're like, it's great. You're gonna love it. You won't have any free time.
Yeah. Yep.
You might die.
Yep.
And you could get a divorce.
What a better way to live your life. It's better. It's
Living
markedly
on the edge.
It's living on the edge. It's markedly better than playing video games,
Yeah.
which is a very safe thing to do.
Love it.
Yeah.
Cozy.
cozy, unless you're doing it while driving. But anyway, it's elk season now. Remi over there at Cutting the Distance podcast, which is the thing that you need if you want to learn anything about the outdoors, but particularly elk at this time of year.
Well, that's the thing. I don't have a whole lot of questions for Remi because I've listened to every episode of his podcast.
You know what you need to know.
Yes.
Phil even gets the behind the scenes stuff, the extra stuff.
That's right. I get the outtakes. I've heard more of it than anybody.
You get the stuff like, oh, damn. Yeah. I gotta say that again. But we've heard like how 50-some stories now, a bunch of elk content. I was the other day in the truck in a parking lot waiting for my son to get out of a doctor's appointment, blowing on the elk call, listening to Cutting the Distance, thinking about, as you say, Remi, all the time, like this is kind of not fair. 10 to 20 years ago, there wasn't this information accessible. You couldn't download Remi Warren's elk hunting brain. And so it's kind of, are you giving away too many secrets, you feel like?
I am absolutely giving away too many secrets. It's scaring the crap out of me because I'm thinking like, is the way that I hunt work because other people aren't doing it? And I think that that's the case. And now I'm like running into people that are like hunting the way that I'm hunting, or have listened, or are successful. Especially this spring, man. Like the whole, like I talked to so many people that were like, hunt, maybe not even the same areas that I do, but just like, oh yeah, I had success doing, like so many people that had struggled with bear hunting and then use those tips that I gave, the calling and the other stuff, and have been successful. And I'm like, man, I think I might be like shooting myself in the foot here. I had a good thing going. Now everybody knows what I know.
Have you ever run into anybody in the backcountry that got there from your tips? That would be the ultimate. That'd be the worst.
Oh yeah, for sure I have.
Yeah, you have.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Somebody's like, hey man, love your podcast. I'm only here because you told me to look in high mountain basins.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that has happened. Like I would say at least a dozen times.
No.
Last year was yeah. Last year was pretty funny though.
Give us one story. Give us a story.
Well,
One story.
This one guy was just like, I actually was coming back down, and this guy like saw me, and he was just like, at first he's just like looking at me, and he's like, "That's so weird." I was like, "What's that?" He was like, "Well, I mean, I was just following your tips, and then I kind of found, and this was a spot that I'd never been either, so it was just like a new area." He's like, "I was following your tips, and then I picked this spot, and then I saw you here, and I was just like, I wasn't sure." He's like, "Okay, we got to get like a selfie and the pictures," and I'm like, "Oh, great! Now this spot's going to be posted all over the place." I'm pretty careful about keeping like backgrounds out of things, but I thought it was just hilarious because it was like a new place that I'd never hunted, and then here comes this guy that had just listened. He was like, "Literally, I was just listening to this, and I listened to that episode 3 times. It was on the map,
Read the map.
Which one it was? Yeah, exactly. And like scouting and picking areas. And he's like, he essentially did the same thing I did. And we came to the same conclusion and then ended up in the same freaking spot. And I'm like, what are the odds of that?
You're like appearing
like
out of
probably
nowhere
pretty
for
good.
everyone. They're like, he's probably, oh my gosh, Remi Warren. He appears out of the trees when I listen to his
Exactly.
podcast. If I say Remi Warren 3 times into the mirror, he'll appear.
And then I just appear. Yeah, if you're glassing and you go Remi Warren, Remi Warren, Remi Warren, I just show up and start glassing.
You should. If you
It's
see
kinda
somebody,
crazy.
if you see somebody and they say, "Oh man, I know your podcast," be like, "Yes, I've traveled here to give you one last tip," and then say it and then just disappear into the trees.
Like the hunting Highlander.
Yes, the hunting Remi Warren, the hunting Highlander. Just appearing on your Onyx maps. Maybe we should get with Onyx and have a thing where they can follow you around and try to find you, kind of like a treasure hunt.
I feel like they already do that.
That's true. That's true. That's true. Hunting media is the ultimate oxymoron. So Remi, we're in elk season now. We're in it. It opened the 5th here. People who listen to this on the 8th and 9th, something like that. We got to give people I know your last podcast, we gave people the essential tips from cutting the distance. But for a lot of people that listen to this will be going on their first elk hunt or one of their first, and we know that it's like a 10% success rate for do-it-yourself public land elk hunters out there. 1 out of 10 people kill a bull, or you kill a bull 1 out of every 10 years you have a tag. And that's a sketchy idea. And so I want you to kind of give a few things, maybe already secrets you've already put out there so we don't drain your well of secrets, but some things that you know that will get people at least in the right area when they're trying to kill a bull.
Yeah, I mean, September I think is the best time to kill a bull because it's the one time that elk are making a lot of noise. They're vocal, they're rutting. It's just like anything else. You hunt whitetails during the rut, they're the most active. So there's a lot of different techniques you can use. It doesn't matter how experienced you are with elk hunting, because there's so many different techniques you can use that might even be similar to what you already use. But I think the key to really being successful is just understanding elk behaviors. And once you understand that, or get a basic idea of elk behaviors, then you can kind of capitalize and key in. So there's a couple of the things that I was talking about, like wallow hunting and focusing on wallows, how to find wallows. That's a great way for people just getting into it. That's like, hey, maybe you have only tree stand hunted. I mean, you can take those same tree stand tactics and use those over a wallow, over a water hole. Understanding what a wallow is and which one's going to be productive. And mostly the productive one's going to be based on smell, like a wallow that stinks real bad is a good perfume station for these elk during the rut. So that's a great place to start.
Yeah, I mean, I've personally I've come across, I had 4 wallows I was going to hang cameras on this year, and each one of them was dry. It just felt like somebody was messing with me out there. So finding wallows, if you go to a place like I was in where there's a spring-fed creek, or there's just like a spring that was creating 2 wallows, and it was dry this year, but there's a creek below. And I thought, well, I'll just go walk this creek. I'm going to find a wallow or something on this creek where it pulls up, at least where I know they're coming to water. Never did find it. I know it's there somewhere, but I mean, is there any other tactic other than those types of things to find them?
Yeah, I mean, looking for those riparian areas is good, but also like in the like where those creeks come down, if there's like a flowing side creek that starts maybe like midway down the mountain, following that area up to where like looking on your map on the topo and finding like a little flat spot where it flattens out below a steep area. So like a steep hill in a basin or just a draw, and then it kind of has this flat spot and then goes into a creek. Generally, the water will settle and pool there. That's a good spot to look. And like you did following the creeks, I mean, it's not an exact science. You do have to do some ground proofing for it. So maybe that area just doesn't particularly have a lot. Maybe start looking on some of the more shaded side. Like if it's a more drought type year, look in some of those areas that might be a little bit more shaded. Or like maybe just another draw over, maybe the elk are in that area, but they're going to wallow one draw on either side. So, exploring a little bit is good. But the nice thing about September is, hey, you don't know where the wallows are. You don't know where the elk are at. Well, you can just make noise and they should make noise back and tell you where they are. So that's the key of that's why archery season, September season, I think is the best time to chase elk. I mean, actually, if I was to think about it, people are like, oh, bow hunting's hard. I think that if I was between a general archery season for elk or a general rifle season for elk, I would choose the archery season. I think it's a lot easier to hunt elk with a bow because it is during the rut and they are vocal and they're easier to find. Whereas once you get later in the season, those later rifle seasons, man, it can be it can be really hard to even find elk. So it's really nice to have that option to bugle, to call, and to get elk to tell you where the heck they are.
Yeah. And especially when, we have shoulder seasons here in Montana, but even in late season, man, a lot of these elk are down on private land, and it can be a struggle. You can find yourself glassing all the elk you want in an ag field, standing under the pivot in the snow. And so that's a huge one. Did you bring a call? Do you have a call with you?
Oh yeah, I got some calls sitting here.
So do you like the basic, I think obviously the more productive call out there, the call that you have to really perfect to get good at this is a bugle. But first I started can I put a call in my mouth? Can I put a diaphragm call in my mouth and start with making the sounds of a cow, and then without the bugle tube, try to make the sounds, the elevation of sounds with the tongue pressure that I need to make that kind of the bugle sound before I try to bring life to it and put the bugle tube to my mouth. Is that a good way? Is that your suggestion to learn, or is there, the tips to picking something up for the first time and kind of figuring it out?
Yeah, I think I use diaphragm type calls for elk calling just because they're so versatile and you can make so many different sounds. But there's all different kinds. There's exposed, I can't even remember. I used so many different ones over the years and they've changed so much. I think the first thing to do would be just kind of understand and master those cow calls, because you'll get the idea of changing the pressure and getting those good tones. So it's really a good idea to just try to get a few different cow calls going, and then you can kind of work into a bugle. And I've said this before, and I even said it on my podcast, how good you are with the bugle, it does make a difference in some ways, but it's more so how good you sound than knowing when to call and kind of the movements and the type of actions you should take. So there's a lot more to just the behavior than the actual sound itself. And that goes a long ways, especially when you're starting out. I think a lot of people they're like, I don't know how to call. I'm not really good at it. And are a little bit timid with it. But it doesn't necessarily, if you don't know what sound to make, listen to the elk, just copy what you hear or to the best of your ability, and you'll probably do all right.
Yeah, that's one thing that you said in your podcast that I wanted to make sure you shared. I'm glad you said that was there's nothing. Yes, I'm sure you can make some terrible noises with the bugle tube, scare all the elk in the drainage, but you're never going to learn that interaction unless you have it. And so go for it, have it, and see what happens.
Exactly. Yeah, and I think part of it too is I think one key to calling elk is people think like, oh, I'll bugle, they bugle, and they're like, they get this bull bugling across the canyon, and they're like, the bull never came in. It's like, yeah, of course it didn't. Like, that's not what elk do. What elk do is they like make noise, and most of the bugles, like just understanding that a lot of the bugles aren't for another bull, it's for the cows that are there. So they're displaying for the cows. They aren't necessarily always like trying to talk to the other bulls. And so just because one elk bugles and another elk bugles doesn't mean that elk's going to come over to the bugle. He probably has cows, and he's expecting other elk to try to come in and steal those cows, and he's not going to leave those cows. So one of the ways that I've found a lot of success bugling is like going into the title of the podcast, cutting the distance between yourself and the bull. When that bull bugles, just getting closer and closer and closer till you get to a point where you aren't going to spook him, but he really doesn't have as much of a choice than to come in because you're already kind of in the herd.
Yeah, and I've figured that out too. And for everybody listening, that's an East Coaster, or you don't live in a place where elk are accessible and you can hunt them. I'll tell you this, the quick anecdote. We had a guy in here that was coming on the Meat Eater podcast who was from Austin. He had a couple of his production team members with him, the young guys from the city. Yanni blew an elk call, and I was blowing on some elk calls. And the look that these guys had, they had never heard somebody blow an elk call before. They likely never heard an elk bugle before or seen an elk before. The look they had on their faces when we made those noises and showed them what an elk was unbelievable. It was like a little kid discovering dinosaurs for the first time. And so, just to get out
incredible.
there, and just to get out there and dive into it is enough. If you've never done it before, that's enough. It should be enough. It was enough for me when I first really went hard at learning the craft of hunting elk, and so it can be. I think just an amazing thing to do. And probably, how many years you've been doing it now? Probably 25. 20?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know.
At least.
I don't know. We need Phil to do math.
Phil?
Just kidding.
Phil's playing video games on his phone. He's checked out.
Yeah.
He's hunting.
I've been chasing elk for like 23 years or something.
And it never gets old. I can't imagine you're jaded to any part of it. Hopefully you're not.
No, I think and here's the other thing. I mean, I would consider myself an elk expert of sorts. I mean, I've spent since I was 18 years old every day of the season.
Not of sorts.
An elk expert. An elk hunting expert. I mean, I'm a professional elk hunter. I've taken people hunting every day. I've spent every day of the Montana season plus extra seasons, in other places hunting elk since I was 18 years old. But even then, there's things I don't know about elk. So it's not that, you're constantly learning. You'll get into a scenario and you'll say, most of the scenarios end up being similar, but you'll get into scenarios that are a little bit different. And you go, and you'll learn something and you'll go, oh, that's a new way to trick them. Ooh, that's, okay. I didn't really realize that they were going to do that. And over the years, you just keep getting better and better and learning more and more and having more situations, scenarios. And that's the cool thing about why I say understanding elk behavior is because the more time you spend with them, the more you understand them and the easier it is to hunt them and take them. Yeah. It's like the same 10% of the people shoot 90% of the elk. Those guys are the people that understand elk behavior and really just like how to get close and how to bring them in.
Yeah, and that whole process is what interests me too. That intellectual property of knowing where the elk, spending a couple of years and moving to Montana. My idea was like nobody tell me where you go. I'm going to find my spots. I'm going to get that intellectual property. I'm a new guy. I want the new guy process. I want to find spots, find elk, understand them, understand what they're doing in July and August, September, October, and then 5 years in. Have a full understanding of the landscape, of the animal, of the habitat, of the calling. That's as fun as anything because then it starts to become a craft rather than just a thing you go do on the weekends.
As you know, the Meat Eater live tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in meat eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.
I think that there's certain things that kind of break down that learning curve, and stuff like podcasts. There's a lot of more information out there. I just know, like, when I was getting into it or starting out, I would watch elk hunting videos, and it was nothing like the experiences that I had calling elk. Because most of those videos were done on really like limited not necessarily high fence places, but just like very unhunted, like premier tag kind of places where they call and elk seem to just run in. And it's like, man, on public land in general areas, that just did not seem to be the case. There's a lot of miles that didn't get shown in between, a lot of struggle in between. But understanding, like, you might do something and nobody ever talked about you blow an elk call and an elk runs away, and you think like, oh, I did something wrong. And that's not actually the case. It's just understanding that behavior of, like, that's what elk do when they're calling toward each other. And you might have to put in some legwork and catch back up and keep dogging them and do other things to get those elk to commit to your call and to the whole thing that you're creating. Yeah. And just understanding that is huge.
Do you ever look back? Because I do look back at the dichotomy of when you and I were coming up and what was available. I think about like guys like Larry D. Jones and Will Primos and all these people that were making videos and making, I had tapes and then DVDs and it was magazines and stuff growing up. And a lot of that stuff it all ended in a kill, all of it. Whether it was a whitetail or an elk or whatever, the videos were like 10 kills in an hour. And it was all this that's how it was set up. And it was meant to obviously sell calls or sell whatever product was going on. But that's how it was. And it's only been, I don't know how recently, that we started to experience like, hey, here's all the things that go on in between. And Solo Hunter, the show that you do, is important for that, because you guys show all of the struggle, and you set up a camera by yourself, and you show killing an animal. So there's a lot there. But do you ever think about coming up and what wasn't there, and maybe how that made you an expert you had to be, because you had to go and do it yourself? There wasn't Remi Warren's Cutting the Distance to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, that was the thing, is you'd only see that like successful interaction, and when it happens, you're like, yup, and it seems easy, but it doesn't show all the stuff in between to get to that point. And for me, it's like, I think when people go out and hunt with me, they're like, okay, I'm really good at getting elk into bow range. But what they didn't understand, or most of them are surprised, is like, wow, there's a lot of hard work to get to that point. And if you can, it's like, you got to be in shape. You got to be, you got to keep after it. It's long days. It's like, but when it happens, damn, is it good? If you just take that highlight reel of when it's damn, it's good, you're like, wow, that's easy, but it doesn't show all the stuff in between. And I think that's important, is just because I think, if you're first time going out, and it'd be super easy to get discouraged when you think, I should be blowing this elk call and elk should be running in. And not that doesn't happen. Like, I've had that happen. I mean, it's just random, but for the most part, those kind of scenarios are few and far between. It's mostly you have to play this game, and that game involves a lot of different tricks, and all those different tricks kind of come with experience or knowledge. And I think that it's awesome to be able to share that knowledge, so you could go out for the first time now and understand, have a better picture, I believe, of what it takes to be successful. Not just understanding elk calling, but understanding why you do it, how you do it, when you can do it. And then maybe some of the steps in between. Yeah,
and if you think of it as a series of lessons that elk is teaching you, that's how I look at it. It's like the obstacle is the way, and that elk is often the obstacle. And that's every time you get an interaction and something doesn't go right, or you get winded, or he rounds up his cows and goes over the hill. Oh, that's a lesson I need to learn, and you got to kind of have that intuition to know what is the lesson, what didn't I do right, or what did I do right. And so that's where I think your tip, you can explain a little bit about it, but we're going to have it on the Cutting the Distance. So we we already have talked about it. But your lesson for bulldogging is, I think, one of the better elk hunting lessons there is to learn, because it seems like in real time that you did something wrong, but really, in your explanation of bulldogging, you did something right, but now you got to capitalize on what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've heard it so many times, and maybe like me saying these tips might actually make it not true in the future. Too many people do it, but I mean, I remember reading like articles from guys that would say, elk are call shy, or you don't want to bugle too mean and too big because then the elk go away. And I'm like, that's talk from people that haven't done a lot of elk hunting, because if you understand elk, you realize like that's what elk do. You gotta take yourself and stop being so, I guess, like human-centric, egocentric, and thinking that every time you do something, it's because you're a human. Like if that elk thinks you're an elk, which is what you want it to do, it's going to respond to you like you're an elk. And what elk do to other elk is they're going to round up their cows and go away. That means you did something right. That means that elk thinks that like something real is going on. And that doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. Like there's definitely ways that you can capitalize on that. It just takes a little bit of leg work and some maybe some fast moving and some more calling, and you can turn that scenario into success. I would say 80% of the elk that I kill or get hunters on, it's that kind of moving cat and mouse game where they're going, you're going, and you're trying to get that bull to get pissed off enough to come fight you.
Phil, we're going to engage you now in this conversation.
Uh-oh.
You listen to all Remi's elk podcasts.
Yes.
What do you remember about bulldogging? Do you remember anything at all? It's been a year since he.
Yeah. Here's the thing. As a person who knows absolutely nothing about hunting, essentially, like Remi's podcast is a tough entry point. I feel like you need to have at least like a 101 understanding of what's going on, and then
Sure.
Remi's show is like incredibly helpful.
Yeah.
And I don't even have that 101 understanding. So
Yeah, where like Remi has guys he sees in the woods that are saying, you gave me the tips to get here. I see people in like the liquor store that are buying White Claw, and they're like, hey,
thanks
to you, I got here.
thanks, man. Selfie.
Appreciate it. Selfie.
Yeah.
That's how it works. So THC could
So
be
the
your
answer
window.
is no. I know.
I just want to engage you in this conversation.
Well, I appreciate you thinking about me, Ben.
Yeah, I'm thinking about you. You're just right there. I mean, I'm looking at you.
Yeah.
You're looking good.
Hey.
Remi, do you want to try to do a little elk call run through here? Maybe for Phil. Phil, you can kind of ask questions as a new hunter. Remi, kind of take him through the learning if you're a brand new fella.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, so we'll start with cow calls. So just explain to Phil, and Phil, please ask questions about if you first time picking up a diaphragm, putting it in your mouth, and then here goes the lesson, Phil. Get ready.
Okay, so you got your cow call. We're going to start with the cow call. So the cow call is basically just the sound that really obviously cows make, but they make a lot of different sounds. So they got the basic sound they make would be like a mew, and it's just a ew sound. Ew. That's just with my voice. Like if you can make that sound with your voice, you can pretty much make that sound with a call, I believe, because a lot of people think like, oh, the call makes the sound, but it's the pressure and the way that you make that call that makes it better. So I mean, first thing I would do is just practice making those tones and sounds with your voice, because you'll know when to make those tone changes. So like a basic mew, I'm just going to do it with my voice. Ew, ew, ew. And then I'll use a call here. I don't know if it'll pick it up right or what, but it might get loud. I'll try to do it quiet. Just mew, mew, mew. And you can talk back and forth with those cow calls. Cows make a lot of different sounds. I think one of the most effective cow calls would be more of like an estrus whine, especially later in the season. That can be, I've heard it so many different ways. I mean, you talk about a cow call and people name these cow calls and you expect it to be a certain way, but you get into a herd of elk and listen, you'll hear about 500 different sounds that you're like, okay, just start making some of those sounds. The only one you don't want to do is like a bark where it's like a, that one is a little dangerous, but outside of that,
how is that dangerous? Just out of curiosity.
That's just an alert. Like it's like danger. It's one cow. Like when you get busted, if you hear that sound, you know you did something wrong.
Got it.
It's like a high pitched, just when they're barking at you. It's like literally like a high pitched dog bark, and that's like alerting all the other elk. Like pay attention. There's some danger around. But for the most part, cows will talk back and forth, and cow calls can be a great way to locate elk because you might be able to get those cows to make noise, especially if it's like hot. They aren't making, like the bulls aren't really bugling. You can use those cow calls to kind of identify where the elk might be.
I was out in the office trying to find a cow call, but I couldn't find one. Trying to find diaphragm.
I'd say the best place to look is Yanni's desk. He usually
I looked there.
Oh, you did? Okay.
I look at Steve's desk, Yanni's desk, nothing.
Okay.
So I was going to see if Phil could try this for the first time, but we'll have to save that for another time.
Oh yeah, that's one thing I've never. I have turkey calls. I have cow calls. Just it's like sitting in my car. Because Yanni's like, here, take these, Phil, and he like throws me a handful, and I've never once tried to use any.
You got them in your car right now?
Any kind of call. I think I only have turkey calls in my car. I've got a cow call at home though.
Oh man,
Turkey calls work. That'll work. They're all the same, really.
Yeah, it's really latex, and that's it. That's all that really matters.
I would say if you're getting started though, there's like pick up a cow call. There's different kinds of cow calls you can get. I would say like start with maybe like I've got this open reed one here. I haven't used it in a long time, but I just grabbed it because I figured it'd be good to talk about. So like these open reed ones, you kind of put your teeth on them. Mm-hmm. I'll try it right now and just.
Yeah.
So it's just biting down and adding pressure and blowing over this reed. There's other kinds, they call them like bite calls, where those are really easy to use too. You just bite the call and then blow and make that EU sound through the call. And then there's even push button calls. Those are, they get a lot of
Hoochie Mama.
Hoochie Mama. The other one, I don't even what's it. There's another one. It was called like the Buttalo or something like that. The button one. I think it was either like a Carlton call or something like that. I thought that one was a lot better. It made a few more different sounds. And even when I was guiding for a long time, I would have one of those in my pocket so I could do like a diaphragm call, like a bite call, and then that in my pocket where it sounds like different call elk in different directions, like creating kind of this party or this illusion of like multiple cows. And you can do that by yourself. It's like like the one man band, the guy that's got the harmonica on the thing with I want to
interrupt
and the
Remi
drum
and say
thing.
that the most fun I've ever had working on your podcast was the elk party episode. That just came out a couple weeks ago.
I noticed, I was like, okay, actually, I thought it was pretty funny because there's like this part where I'm in my office and I was like, you cannot tell, but I was literally sprinting back and forth, like jumping and like my office is just like antlers and things all over the ground. I'm just like jumping over shit and falling and like ran into a stool, I'm like, what am I doing?
You're just living it, man. You're giving people the realness. The real stuff.
The realness.
I love it. All right. Yeah. Well, I was off looking for diaphragms, but did you give a few like entry level beyond the just like diaphragm calls that you're going to do for cows? Let's hear a couple of those. I think so.
Oh yeah. Here I'll just use this. These open reed ones are really good to get that
like
whine sound because you can go like up and down, like high low. I like to think of like the estrus whine almost like a bugle with kind of like if a cow were to bugle. And I've heard these like calls just in crazy, like sometimes they're real aggressive or even like two cows fighting. It just sounds like this. It's a weird sound. But yeah, you can do that. I'll do that with this one. I'll give it a try. I haven't used it in a while.
Yeah, knock it out.
Try it. So So those like longer sounds would be more like that maybe a cow coming into heat. But I've even heard like a sound similar like to that estrus call of that lead cow when she's like the one that's in charge that they're paying attention to, or that's a really good way to get other cows to kind of respond, that long drawn out cow sound. Even with some of these open reed calls too, if you're like new to calling and you just are having trouble with the diaphragm calls, I mean, you could even rip a couple bugles with these things. Like it's a good enough bugle. I'm going to try it. I don't actually know if it'll work, but
live elk calling,
take the
go
rubber
for it.
band. Yeah, take the rubber band off. The hard part is my microphone's by my head and the end of the bugle tube's like.
One of my while you prepare, one of my favorite things is the names of elk calls. I got an open reed call called the EZ Estrus by Phelps, and I just love the names. I want to come up with my own call company just to make the names of the calls.
Just naming them, yeah. I've got some calls coming out that have some good names.
Oh, I knew I should have known. You should have let me help you, man. I'm out now. I'm pissed.
I know. Yeah. So
let's hear it.
I don't know, but wait. Oh yeah, let's
hear that bugle.
I'll try this. This is just with open reed. We'll see if this works. Hold on. It might take me a one or two, but. That wasn't too bad.
That's pretty good. That's better than mine. Yeah. That's better than what it sounds like for me. I have a bugle too.
That was just with an open reed call, like just biting down.
See, man, I feel like that's Michael Jordan, like shooting at half court, going, "I'll see if this goes in. See if this goes in," and then he just drains it. He's like, "Oh yeah, interesting."
Sweet. Yeah, no, but I'm just saying, like you don't have to be so wrapped up on it when you're getting started, the call or whatever. I used for a long time calls that I think people like maybe would say look down on, but you get or like the pros are like, oh, that's a over the whatever top latex style call, not a diaphragm call. You can't call with that. And be like, yeah, okay, here's a photo album of all the elk I've called in with it. It's like, it doesn't really matter. I mean, later, actually, when I was guiding, I would always start out with my diaphragm calls and everything. That's what I use. But sometimes, by week 5 or 6, or as you start to get in the rifle season, your mouth just gets so tired. I just like switch up the different types of calls just to keep from getting like, I'd have calluses on the roof of my mouth from calling all day, every day, but like I said, just start practicing and just understand, get that bugle down, and then understand those cow calls. And maybe you aren't good at calling or aren't feeling confident calling. Well, look for scenarios where the kind of calling you can do will call in a bull. So let's say you're out there, it's the first time elk hunting and you're glassing, like do a lot of glassing, and you spot a bull that's by himself and you have got these cow calls down. Maybe you've got a push button call in your pocket. You've got an open reed call. You've got a bite call, and you can make that sound, Okay, sweet. You will call that bull in. Like that's a pretty good scenario where you can call that bull in. Watch him, see where he goes. If he's moving, go and cut him off. Get ahead of where you think he's going to go. Get the wind right and start throwing out some cow sounds. And that bull will probably come in quiet. He'll come check things out, and he'll probably be within range. And that's like just understanding if I see that scenario and I'm hunting, I'm like, okay, yep, that bull is a dead bull. And just looking for those scenarios that kind of match the type of hunting or maybe the techniques that you know how to do, and then go for those scenarios. I personally love to bugle in bulls. So I like to get bulls fired up. I like that whole exchange of bugling. I mean, there's times where I'll be bugling and I'll get a bull to respond, but he just doesn't seem like he's going to get fired up, or he kind of quiets down. Instead of wasting a lot of time on that bull, I might just go somewhere else. Might just start looking for a bull that wants to play with the type of tactics that I want to employ that day. Yeah. And that's another thing to think about.
Yeah, I love that. And I'll tell you, I'm manning Remi at themeateater.com quite often. That stuff comes in my inbox and I read a lot of it. I love to do that just because I like to hear what's on people's mind. And I think that comes, I know you know this, but that comes in quite a lot. I'm going on a DIY elk hunt in the public lands. I've got a whole chunk of national forest. Maybe it's 1 million acres, maybe it's 100,000, doesn't really matter. Big chunk of national forest to run through. When you're going into something like that, say you're going in by yourself, you've got 7 days to hunt. How many spots have you looked at on Onyx? How many basins or how many drainages have you looked at? Because I've heard others say, like, I always have at least 4 spots that I'm going to check out that I know that I can get to within half a day's time or whatever. But it's interesting to know, like, what's the layout of a hunt, or are you just kind of popping from place to place if something doesn't work out?
Yeah, I mean, I don't spend a lot of time if I don't find what I like. I think some people might spend more time. I'm just like, yeah, I'll just go until I find what I'm looking for. I mean, I have a lot of spots that I like to check out. So it just depends. I mean, if I like a new area, like I've got an elk tag in an area I've never been this year, and I'm gonna actually most of my hunts. I like to try to go to new spots now and just try new places, and I'll probably have a dozen places that I want to check out or something, I mean, and I rank them, the first one I probably run into elk at, but if I get down to number 12,
yeah, it's desperate times.
Okay.
You're by the highway
times.
At that point.
Right. Yeah, exactly. But you're kind of like, I might just, kind of be mobile the first couple days and really just kind of check things out, get a lay of the land, understand like, okay, this has what I'm looking for. This doesn't have what I'm looking for. You might get in somewhere and say, oh, this isn't really what I was looking for. Or you get somewhere and there's 8 trucks there and you're like, nah, next. Like I just write that off,
Yeah.
I'd rather go to maybe a less productive place with fewer people and where I can work a bull than have to mess with other people calling. And some places you go and you just can't even get away from that. So you just kind of got to bite the bullet and say whatever.
Yeah, that's what I said. I've had people say, hey, let me know when you're going into this spot, if we both kind of stumbled on the same spot, or if we're sharing a spot, like, let me know when you're going to be in there. I said, man, I'm not. There's so many places for me to go. Like, I'm never, if you're going to be in there, let me know. I just won't go. I'm not going to fight anybody over a spot. It's not worth it. It's just on public land, especially like that philosophy. People kind of take ownership of a spot or an area and be like, man, I'm not. If you're going in there, go. I'll go somewhere else always. Maybe that's to the detriment, but that's just how I look at it.
Yeah, and I mean, there's definitely room to roam in a lot of places, but I don't know. I just like to have options and then kind of, keep. I like to stay, I would say, like mobile enough to where I'm not really bogged down in one place that that's not going to be productive. If it's not productive, it's not productive. Not saying it won't be productive 2 days later, not saying I won't check it again, not saying I won't go back, but if it's not productive while I'm there, then I'm going to go try to find somewhere that's going to be productive while I am there.
Sure. Well, I just cracked open the Remi at themeateater.com. You want to do a couple questions real quick? I don't want to drain your well for your next Q&A, but a couple good ones. A couple good ones in there.
Yeah, for sure.
Anton Mironov, he said, I'm prepping for an October elk hunt in Idaho and have some questions to help with my Onyx Google Earth scouting. I've heard you all talk about the 3 things elk need: feed, water, cover, north-facing slopes with thick timber being a choice bedding area. My questions: how much timber is enough? Does there need to be a large area of contiguous timber, or are patches sufficient? If yes, what is large? So how many trees can an elk sleep under?
I mean, it really depends on the type of, like the type of terrain. If you're talking like high desert, open desert, man, 4 trees, like it might not even, an aspen. Well, actually more like high desert to be like those aspen patches in a canyon where everything else is open, but somewhere to just keep the sun off. I mean, think about an elk. One thing that I learned early on, and I remember one of the first outfitters, he would always say this, is like, elk are always hot. It doesn't matter the time of year. They're always hot. You think about them like they're wearing a giant, massive fur coat all year round, and they're always hot. So you got to think about, how is that hot animal going to cool itself down, especially in September when it could be hot, 80 degrees out. They're going to want enough to where it's shaded. It's, 10 degrees cooler than out in the sun or more, and find those spots. And that might even necessarily be a hill that stays shaded longer is going to stay cooler longer, and that hill that has trees on it's going to be cool. And maybe there's a creek or something nearby. Like they like to stay cool. So find those places. If it's somewhere that you feel like you could go into and stay shaded, sweet. I mean, I've seen 20 elk bed in a patch of junipers that would be like real thick pinyon juniper stuff out in the desert. That's, I don't know, 30 yards across maybe.
Yeah.
So it's just like, it just depends. They just need something. But, if the area does have a lot of thick timber, then that's good too. I mean, it just depends on where you're at.
All right, we got Garrett Moody. We'll do one more. Garrett Moody says, I'm an elk hunter from Washington State. I'm new to archery hunting and was curious if you had any tips on calling lone bulls or elk in very small groups. He hunts Roosevelt's in an area with very low elk density where he encounters lone bulls more often than elk in herds. I was curious if you had input on calling in these situations. Thanks for the show.
Yeah, that's what, I kind of already talked about that, but lone bulls are the easiest elk to call in.
Yep.
For a lot of reasons. Like, they can be tricked so many different ways. They can be cow called in. Now, one of the difficult things with a lone bull is you might be calling to him and he may not call back. He may want to check things out before he commits to a setup. So if you got a lone bull that's like responding, bugling, and he doesn't have any cows, you can bugle back. You can pretty much do whatever, just to kind of maybe throw out some of that elk party action, make some cow calls, some bull calls, and then I would just switch to bull calling, and you'll probably bugle that bull right in. If he's just kind of by himself and maybe he's like, maybe he'd been kicked out or beat up by another elk, making some of those cow calls might be a better way to just draw him in without the potential of pushing him off. Because another thing that in low density areas too, what you like at an elk in an area that maybe only has a couple cows, what you'll notice is he's pretty likely to just round those cows up and push them off because they're hard to find. It's like, it's not one of those things where he can just get in there and keep them. They're easier. Those elk kind of like may not even want to be pushed around by a bull. They can disperse pretty easy. So, if you get real aggressive right off the bat, it might be something where you push that elk away as opposed to draw him in. But I think one thing in those scenarios you got to be careful of is just thinking that the bull isn't coming in because you aren't hearing him, because those lone bulls do tend to come in silent. And it's not as fun, but it can still be successful.
Yeah, we had that a couple times last year where you can hear them coming in, but they're not bugling. Like, you can hear them crashing, you can hear them, you hear coming. We had last year a bull come up the bottom of this drainage that was splashing through a creek, and you could just hear him. But he never bugled one time. You could hear him breathing, and we never did see him.
Oh, yeah.
We knew he was there. So the beauty of elk hunting is that mystery.
Yeah.
So just going through this, man, what's beautiful about this is going through all the emails you receive about your podcast, and there is so much diversity. I mean, looking at an email from Tori Solmutson. She's 59-year-old female, and she's going out on her first hunt this year. We have Phil will know I can't pronounce anybody's name, but look at this one, Phil. Maylin Balajadia. Maylin Balajadia from Alaska.
Yeah, I'm not even going to
I tried.
give a crack.
Anton Mironov, we talked about. I mean, people from all walks of life, all across this country, genders, ethnicities, doesn't matter, man. All this stuff brings people together, so it's good, man. Just straight knowledge at cutting the distance, and it's knowledge that is bringing people together. So well done, Remi Warren.
I like it.
I like
Thanks.
it too. You want to send us out with just a beautiful, earth-shattering, forest-changing bugle? Just rip one for us, and then we'll say goodbye.
Yeah, sure. It'll mostly be through my throat. Or I'm going to take my headset off so you can
Just
actually
rip
hear
it,
the
man.
thing. Yeah, all right. I'm going.
Phil nearly fainted.
That's good.
I had to grab the table for stability.
He's like,
Why? Well, Mr. Warren, good luck in Alaska, dude. Let us know how it goes, and all you people out there be listening to Cutting the Distance. We were just going to do kind of like an opening segment here, but this is going to be a whole damn podcast because why the hell not?
Sure.
That's how we roll. So we'll
Perfect.
talk to you soon, man. Thanks, Remi.
All right, talk to you later.
Later.
See ya. Bye.
that's it. That's all. Another episode in the books. Now we have to have a little conversation again behind the scenes. I was intending for this podcast, as I was just telling Remi, for this podcast to be like an intro to another interview we're going to do later with the great, powerful Fred Eichler. If you don't know Fred Eichler, look it up. Go follow him on Instagram. He's the best. He's the funniest. Also an elk guide in Colorado. And so we were going to like have two elk guides talking. Remi's going to be like the intro. But it was such a great conversation. It went for so long. It's going to be one whole episode.
Sure.
And then Phil said,
great idea. Do it more often.
Yeah, he's like, stop making all this work for yourself, idiot. Just have cool conversations with people and then just let it be a podcast. So Phil's sage advice, always heeded here at the Hunting Collective. Never not listen to Phil. Ever.
That's right.
Hey, the Barry K. Gilbert thing, by the by, worked out great.
See, yeah. So in that case, I was wrong.
Yeah. In this case, I think you're right.
Hey.
I think you're right.
I
So
think so,
next
too.
week, we are going to have, I'm going hunting with my dad. He's coming for opening day, as I was just saying to Remi. And so we're going to do a little bit of that next week. We got Fred Eichler coming up. We are going to interview a guy named Paul Bashir, as we talked about a little bit last couple weeks ago. He is one of the premier animal rights activists. He's coming out of Australia. His group is called Anonymous for the Voiceless, and they did protest one of our live shows in Sacramento last year, which is how I was introduced to them. And it was an interesting time. But as I was preparing for that podcast, Phil, I was writing down, I was kind of going through, not, hey, here's the data to tell this guy why animal rights activism is wrong or what I feel about it. One part of the conversation I want to have with Paul is, hey, I would like to understand why you do what you do. Just a discussion and an exploration of why you feel the way you do. I mean, why you feel killing an animal is murder, why you feel we shouldn't eat animal flesh as a society, and that our human evolution has come to a point where now we can live in a world with no meat. And that's what he believes, and he believes it strongly enough to commit his life to the activism around it. So that's interesting enough to me. But then I was also thinking, how do I break that all down and then explain to him why I personally do what I do and why it's important to me, because I think that is the strongest way to convince someone that hunting has value. And that's really the question that I think Paul will ask. I think I was saying, I don't know if I said this before, Phil, but I think Paul Bashir is kind of like the head, like if we give it a video game analogy, he's like the last boss in the hunter versus vegan argument
Good job,
debate
man.
podcast. Is that?
Sure.
He's like Bowser in Mario.
Hey.
Huh?
Yeah. All right.
In a way, because this dude
I was
lives-
really confused, but now that you put
Now-
it that way,
You get it?
I totally understand.
Well, yeah, you play like 3 or 4 levels. You finally get to Bowser. He's throwing fireballs at you.
Exactly. Yeah.
Similar to what this is like.
Uh-huh.
And so when you get to that point, this is a guy who spends his life debating and reasoning and talking out one worldview, one ideology. That's what he does. That's what his group is, and trying to convince people to come to their side, where we as hunters, especially in this podcast, we're not trying to get everybody to go do what we do. We just want some understanding and some social and cultural acceptance where it's currently not. And so I wrote some things down. Phil, would you allow me to read a few things to you?
Yep.
This is kind of the why. If I was talking to a vegan, which I will be very soon, kind of the things I'd want to go through. And I start off by saying, we talk a lot about the North American model of wildlife conservation. We talk a lot about Pittman Robertson. We talk a lot about kind of the mechanisms of conservation. But sometimes those things fall short because they are tangible. They're mechanical. There's not enough emotion there. And I don't wake up. Phil's not going to win. When Phil starts hunting, you're not going to wake up at 3 a.m. because you're participating in the federal duck stand program. You're going to wake up at 3 a.m. because it's really fun and it's your favorite thing to do. And even though it's hard and you're tired and you got to drink a Monster Energy just to get through the morning, and you're not even there with your kids when they wake up and all that stuff, all the time, the energy, the money, you're not out there going like, hey, kids, the reason why I'm out here duck hunting at 3 a.m. or putting my decoys out at 3 a.m. sloshing through the water is because of the federal duck stand program. That's not why you do that shit. No way. And so trying to justify your hunting in that way often falls short. These are side pieces to the explanation, right, Phil? I mean, these are things that I'm saying, right, Phil, like you're going to just say right without listening to what I'm saying next, right, Phil?
Yeah, right.
So these are parallel. These are side benefits to hunting. They're not the reasons we go. So when you're trying to explain something to a vegan, you might fall into the trap of explaining the North American model as though you're some altruistic hunter, that you're out there doing it because where the money comes from and where the money goes, and often that's not exactly the case. So I'm gonna read this, Phil. You ready?
Yeah.
No matter who you're talking to, where they come from, or what they're struggling with in their own lives, there will be something in your explanation of hunting that speaks to them. I've had so many non-hunters say during conversations like the one that I'm going to have, I've never thought of it that way. And so this is how I want to get somebody to that point. This is how I think about my own connection with hunting. You start at a relevant place, kind of the ills of modern society. If you take a look at the rising tide of depression and anxiety amidst the COVID-19 pandemic, it's easy to see that most people need a solution. Hunting can be it. When I think about all the things that bog me down in my daily life, I know that there is a cure in the mountains. Our soft, sedentary lives are overdependent on convenience and technology and often make it harder to tackle complex problems. We need to move, react in real time, and face unforgiving challenges that provide an endless cascade of real hard problems to solve. We have to learn where an elk lives, what it eats, how it moves, its sexual reproduction, and learning how to talk to it. It's an unpredictable landscape that presents a game-like quality that draws me in like nothing else. It turns on my senses, opens the door to a true interactive understanding of the natural world. In that way, hunting has helped me appreciate nature and its many complex systems. I want to know how it all works, how every wild creature plays a role. This leads to a need to understand natural history, predation, and cohabitation. It gives me a participatory connection to the outside that I don't think I could get in any other way. That new relationship has led me to think of the land as a community to which I belong and something I draw from to survive. I want to eat well and have proximity to my food and its impact on the land. Nowadays, we're all driven away from our food source and its ultimate importance to living a happy and healthy life. Going into the wild and coming back with hundreds of pounds of elk meat or just a few skinned squirrels has shown me that I can maintain a close proximity to what I eat while also lessening my impact on the environment. Eating what I kill is much more efficient than anything I could think of. Then comes this understanding of death. Hunting gives me a tragic knowledge of the harsh consequences of life and those decisions we have to make in pursuit of wild game. When I ultimately do take the life of an animal, I must come to grips with why and how. Death is inescapable in nature and in hunting, and I understand it's so much better for having participated. I can no longer fool myself into thinking by simply removing myself from that process that I am not causing death. At the same time, I know that death is almost always beneficial in the wild. That appreciation for death has given me a deeper enjoyment for life. I can't think of anything better than the bonds of hunting with my dad, my best friend, or my producer, Phil. Just put that in there for you, buddy.
Hey.
And experience all of this together is essential to my happiness. To sum this up, because of hunting, I am more fit mentally and physically, better fed, equipped to face tough challenges, more compassionate, and more involved in the natural world. It's not all about ego and bloodlust, like you might have been told. It's about very much more than that. End scene. Phil, commentary.
I gotta say, as a current non-hunter and a person who has no emotional connection to the sport and didn't grow up with it, I wasn't really on board until the death discussion. I'd say, like, this might get people mad at me, but like deep down in my core, I absolutely empathize with the viewpoint of what's his name?
Paul Bashir.
Paul Bashir, this gentleman you're going to speak to soon. I understand that viewpoint.
Sure, so do I.
And I'd say the most compelling argument for hunting is number one, conservation, and I'd say number two, like the culinary aspects, sustainable diets for humans and whatnot. But like the argument of a deeper understanding of nature and wildlife and animals, I would argue that you could get similar feelings by tracking, if you want, like animals and observing them in wildlife, that in an experience that doesn't end with you putting down your binoculars and pulling out a rifle and shooting it through the heart of the lungs.
Sure.
Yep. I'd say a deeper relationship with the concept of death is I'd say that's valuable. I don't know how far the connection with nature argument is going to get you with this guy.
Oh, and I think there is a web of things, and the idea is to present like, listen, if it was just one thing, or if it was a couple things, if I could come out and say like, you know what, eating meat and conservation, those are the 2 reasons I go. That's fine. Those are probably the 2 most logical, most objective things that you could present. Mm-hmm. But there's also personal things that are a little bit deeper than that, right? There's things that you can't really articulate unless you've done it, right? And to the Michael Pollan quote from Omnivore's Dilemma is like, hunting is so much different from the inside than it is from the outside. And that's only because there's these understandings that until you kill something and you look at it in its eyes when it's dying, or you end its life and then you watch that go, there's no way to really experience that. And especially in a wild place where you've done all the things to get there. Like you could go to a farm, walk up to a cow and do the same thing. But the previous experience of learning about it, understanding its place, understanding what preys on it, understanding how many there need to be, understanding the carrying capacity of the land, like all that stuff leading up to that death informs how you feel when it happens, And I think this generation that you're in, that I'm in, of hunters, it's important that they start to open themselves up to that and like that essential learning about death, rather than being like, "Woo, I killed it." Even if that's your initial reaction, no, I'm not gonna tell you what to feel when you kill something. But it's I would just say it's been good for me to kind of sit back and think about that, maybe right after it happens, or maybe later in the day once I'm done cutting it up and once I'm done my elk steak and I'm having a beer, maybe it's time to think about that in that moment. So I would say I will say to Paul, I would say to anybody, I was like, there's stuff in here that doesn't feel like it works unless you run this out the whole way, And as a hunter, I know for sure, and I think most hunters would have to admit that there's some reasonings for hunting that are presented in the hunting community that are full of shit. They're just excuses for, wanting to do something. Mm-hmm. And they're surface level excuses. And that's why, like I said, the federal duck stamp program is fantastic. It is fantastic. It is important. It is a bedrock of our conservation movement. It's a bedrock of why we have as many mallard ducks as we have. It's as important, having that knowledge of the federal duck stamp program, how it works, is as important as knowing why ducks fly south. These things are interconnected. But when you're trying to break it down, Paul Bashir and folks that are arguing from an animal rights perspective, or even your perspective, Phil, as somebody who doesn't really know what this is like, you get to a point where you got to talk about the emotion of it, and you have to recognize that you're killing something. And if you don't recognize that, everything that comes before that, you just be like, well, all the things that came before that are excuses for killing something. Even the food part, on an emotional level, even the food part can sound like, well, I can, if you're just out there for the food, you might just go park along the highway and shoot one in 100 yards with your rifle, drag it over your car, and throw it in wherever it's legal. And so it would be easy for him or for anyone to say, well, if you were just out there for the food, you wouldn't do this, 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 and this. Yeah, you wouldn't. You'd go to the park and shoot a duck in the face and grab it and eat it. You wouldn't wake up at 3 a.m. and go put out a bunch of decoys and wade through cold-ass water. You wouldn't travel to Alaska, to shoot a king eider. You wouldn't go to Alaska to shoot a caribou. You wouldn't. It just wouldn't be the way. And so that's the main, I don't know if any of us will ever get this right. And I will admit that to Paul when we talk. I'm not sure if any hunter would ever get this explanation right, because there's a myriad of ways to explain it. But that's my way. And I've been working on that for some time, and then that'll continue to evolve, I'm sure. And when I finally take you hunting for the first time, Phil, then I'll probably change my explanation based on what you see. And like you say, oh, didn't know this. Now I learned this, and that was important to me coming out of the back end of this hunting experience.
I thought I don't want you to think I was like shitting on, because I thought it was eloquent and it was beautiful. I'm trying to picture it from his point of view, who's a man who's dedicated his entire life to fight with people like you.
Yes. I rather than, as I've said before on this show, I find it more compelling to test my own ideas on somebody like Paul than to test my ideas on somebody like Remi. I want him to make me realize something I'm wrong about. I want him to say something profound to me that makes me maybe not appreciate animal rights, because I've explored that. Maybe he will. I've explored that, though, and I think there's so many elements of it that just don't connect for me objectively, logically, that I just don't know if I'll ever get to a place where I can fully accept what's going on. But conversely, I hope he says something that makes me think, well, as a hunter, I wasn't doing this right, or I wasn't thinking about this the right way, or I wasn't articulating what I was actually doing in a way that made sense, to somebody who's kind of predisposed to hate it. And it's not like imagine one of my first questions for Paul is going to be, how do you walk around in a world where everyone you see is a murderer? How do you do it?
Sure.
Because if you go to Anonymous for the Voiceless, if you go there, look at their Instagram page, they have like Q&As where it's like, well, what if somebody in my family's a non-vegan? And some of the responses like just disassociate. So there's a little bit of an answer to the question of like, what do you do?
Yeah, that sounds intense. That's a very fire and brimstone point of view.
How is this a thing? And it's not like 10 people belong to this organization. It's hundreds of thousands of them.
Yeah.
And if you go to London, or if you travel to Sydney, or even, LA or New York, this is not, because Steve Ranella was asking me, like, why is this something that we should be looking at? All the things going on in the world right now. I was like, dude, there's always going to be an opposition to probably anything that we do. That's important. But this one, it's not a small opposition. It's not like there's just a handful of people that are doing this. There's quite a lot of them. And so we'll continue to kind of pull people in and try to figure out what's going on in their heads, and try to appreciate something about what Paul has to say, and then try to learn something about ourselves that maybe we can do a little better, or maybe we can rejigger some of our explanations on this stuff. And we have our trusty engineer, Phil, to ride along and tell us. You're like the guy in the middle, right? You're like the dude in the middle. You're like the moderator, maybe? No. How do you see yourself, Phil? Explain to the people.
I don't think it's super complicated or like hard to explain. I have no emotional connection to hunting, but at the same time, I'm not like opposed to it. Like maybe when I actually do it, maybe it'll actually pull me further away from it.
It could be.
Like,
dude, you could go out there.
I could shoot something and then realize I didn't like doing that, and I don't want to do it again. But like at the same time, I'm not gonna. I don't think that'll ever turn me into an animal rights activist or like an anti-hunter.
But the best part of this podcast, if you started your own animal rights podcast after hunting with me.
I walk into the office and just put down my letter of resignation.
And you started your own company against me specifically. No, I have some hunting stories from my life, many that don't age well in my own mind. I'm not saying they age well for other people, but like in my own mind, things I've done in hunting that if you approach me today to do them, I wouldn't do them again.
Yeah, sure.
I have some things that don't age well, and that doesn't really produce guilt. It produces like I'm learning as I go, and certainly that's just what it is. And so it's elk season, it's hunting season for many people. Deer seasons are open up across the country, and we're going to talk about that, but we're going to continue to kind of poke at our why and understand what that is, because that's what we do here, and we'll continue to do it. But I'm looking forward to Paul. I'm looking forward to Fred Eichler. I'm looking forward to the dichotomy where we're talking to a seasoned elk guide and having a good time with him, and then next time we're punching it up with Paul Bashir from Anonymous for the Voiceless. So that's coming up in the weeks ahead. Please enjoy your elk season. Say bye, Phil.
Goodbye.
Too long, 'cause I can't go a week without doing wrong. Without doing wrong. Without doing wrong. Without doing wrong. Drinking in heaven.
As you know, the Meat Eater live tour is on April 23rd through May 5th. Chances are in a town near you. What you may not know is you can win tickets to each of these events just by going to a backcountry hunters and anglers pint night. There's going to be a pint night in each of these towns: San Diego, Salt Lake City, Tempe, Anaheim, Boise, Sacramento, Missoula, Portland, Tacoma, where you can compete in Meat Eater trivia and win not only tickets to the show, but a chance to be on stage with all of us. So get your butt to a pint night, and we'll see you on stage.